Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome to an extra EVE talk. Today's video is going to be a little bit of a test for, basically I would call it a 1.2 format for EVE talk. It's still pretty much the same thing, but I'm running this on OBS Studio instead of the old open broadcast software. The main reason is, most of you guys that watch EVE talk have discovered this, is that YouTube is having some real problems encoding the high definition version of EVE talk. In the last 2 weeks, it was up for like 24 hours before high definition was available, and I sort of want to fix that. And my first thought is, well, if we try this on the OBS Studio, it should be different encoding, and I really did tweak open broadcast software to have like maximal sharpness, and that does make for very big files. So I want to compare all of that a little bit, and this is why we are making this extra EVE talk this week. We're also not in Jita, but we are in Amarr. Not only have a few people requested that I take a look at some goods here, but I'm also personally really curious. Dital is actually decently close to Amarr, and so if Amarr would become a trade hub that becomes somewhat competitive with Jita, we definitely want to know that. So let's get started. Now, I'm not doing everything the way we do in the other EVE talks. We've got some nice chat, active chat windows going up here and things like that. We're just going to keep it very clean and very simple, but we are going to start with some plex and stuff, just like in the regular EVE talk 140. Let me put those timestamps down so that I can add them in the description of the video. And let us start with plex and see what we discover here. So almost 2.8 million for the sellers of plex in Jita. That's a little bit less in Amarr, excuse me. I'm gonna have to get used to that. So a little bit less than in Jita, and buyers at 2.54 million. That is definitely a lower price as well. Interesting. Let's take a look then if there's a trade hub nearby. We do see one in a shop, just one jump out. And here the prices are a little bit higher than in Amarr itself, almost 2.8 million as well. And are there more aggressive buyers? Oh, yes, by quite a bit. We're actually going above 2.6 million for the buyers of plex in the Ashap trade hub. So basically slightly lower prices for plex in Amarr compared to Jita. Interesting. The volumes are a lot lower as well though, and if we take a look at the chart here, you can clearly see that since the start of the year, where we had almost 3.5 million, we have a pretty nice decline as CCP basically tried to revalue efforts in the game and has doubled down on trying to fight bots. All of this combined means that the value of ISK has actually gone up, and so the price of plex itself is pretty low, with a very clear bottom range at the moment here in May and in July. So a summer bottom going below 2.5 million, and now right here at the tail end we do have that uptrend just like in Jita, with a couple of volume spikes, and one of them was actually a sale on Omega game time, so you could turn less than 500 plex into 30 days game time. That has definitely caused demand to increase, and that was this spike here up to 2.7 million. But the trend, I think, on the daily averages is still slightly up. I personally think that the end of the summer means more interest in plex, more demand, and as a result I do think that if CCP can build some hype for the winter, that whoever bought here below 2.5 million will be looking at a nice investment. We'll take a quick look at the multiple pilot train certificate. Definitely a completely different vibe here in Amarr from Jita. There's days where none of these get traded, and we're still stuck at the 1.25 billion range. We already see an uptrend in line with plex going on in Jita 4.4. I am covering the entire year here. Yes, I am. Let's take a quick look at sellers and buyers. Not a lot of sellers here, going down to 1.34 billion ISK. Buyers a bit above 1.2 billion, mostly in a shop here as well. And in order to create this average, it really does mean that some people are selling in Amarr to these buyers as well. Next up, we'll take a quick look at the skill extractors. Here we do have that similar chart compared to plex, just like in Jita 4.4, with the same spike up to 320 million ISK. We're hovering around 300 million for the average price, 305 million for the sellers, 282 for the buyers. Perhaps one noticeable difference here, to get these average prices with these sellers and buyers, sellers must be dictating the prices quite a little bit more. We're not in between these two, we're very close to these sellers. So not a lot of buyers are actually grabbing these skill extractors here in Amarr. Next up, we have the injectors then. Let's take a look at the large scale injectors first. And oh man, that is a much sharper move right here. We went below 700 million ISK in August. This decline is similar to what we saw in Cheetah with the same bottom forming, but here in the last couple of days, that is a significant increase in price. 750 million ISK for the sellers, and it's just one of them here. In Amarr itself, we go to 760 in the trade hub and 780 million in Amarr itself, 682 at the buyers. Look at that massive margin here as well between sellers and buyers, and look at the average prices. This really does look like a seller's market where it's this stuff that's moving, and here you will on occasion pick one up, but you will have to be far more patient than, for instance, in Cheetah, where the margin is also a lot smaller. And that is kind of interesting to me personally. Next up, we have the small scale injectors, and this is also something that we don't really see in Cheetah here, because a small scale injector is basically just a number of large scale injectors. You can create this item from this item. They have a very strong correlation, and here we see this delayed reaction to that massive spike in the large scale injectors, where the 5-day moving average is already shooting up towards the 750 million mark, where the small scale injectors are still struggling to get above 150 on that 5-day moving average. Sellers are just above that, 152 million, buyers at 134, also a pretty significant margin between sellers and buyers. Something that you don't see in the Cheetah markets, definitely a lagging behind, I would say, for small scale injectors, and thus potentially a nice opportunity as well to grab some profits on that. Daily alpha injectors next, that is very similar to what we saw in Cheetah. While the large scale injectors were declining to a bottom price in mid-August, the daily alpha injectors have actually rebounded a little bit, although in Cheetah it was up to 40 million and here only up to 35 million ISK. 37.5 for the sellers, 32 million for buyers, also a much larger margin to be spotted here, but we have that same decline in the last couple of weeks that we see in Cheetah here as well. So that makes for an interesting first perspective, and I would say you can have better prices in Amarr than in Cheetah, but if you're looking for those best prices, i.e. those buy orders, you may be stuck waiting a lot longer than in Cheetah before your buy actually triggers, because these average prices are a lot closer to the sellers than to the buyers, at least in the Plex stuff category. So we'll also take a quick look at minerals. I'm not going to do all the categories, this is a little bit of a test, but minerals, advanced moon materials, and I think Take 2 ships are definitely worth it to take a look at it. So minerals coming in at 815. Let's take a look at these. Why am I really interested in minerals? Because we know that minerals have been doing really well in Cheetah, very high prices, up to 8 ISK for instance for titanium. And my thinking is that you would see an increase in mineral activity in Amarr, because it is now something that you won't move in substantial volumes through Niarja in the current situation. And so I do think that local mining should find its way to Amarr. And let's take a look at this. First thing you notice, we went up to 7 ISK and we're already back down from that. So here we are talking, let's take a look, we should really go into Amarr itself. 680, we're at 8 ISK and 820 I think it is in Cheetah, 6.8 ISK for the sellers, 635 for the buyers. Much narrower margin, so definitely some strong competition in these buyers, but also a much lower price. And what I'm clearly noticing here, look at this. Since the first half of August, we obviously have a pretty decent increase in the volumes of trade in titanium. My read on this is that this is exactly what's happening. Supplies, local supplies, are now finding their way to Amarr rather than Cheetah, which means that the local prices here will be going down. And yeah, Cheetah prices are actually really high compared to this. Will this also potentially move industry closer to Amarr? This really feels like the two trade hubs may be getting into competition with one another, and that here Amarr should win out when it comes to attractiveness for industrialists, because you're getting larger volumes, more availability, and lower prices, and thus far more potential to make a profit by producing around here, or at least buying your minerals here. Pyrite had that same decline from 8 ISK at the top to 6, and then is actually already bouncing off of that a little bit more aggressively. We're talking 675 for the seller, still below 7, and 576. I think this is in line with JITA. I'm not 100% sure, but it's definitely a very similar looking chart. Volume wise, well, we're not seeing as structural an increase in volumes just yet, which may be normal. Of course, pyrite is quite a little bit smaller than titanium. Titanium basically the hardest to move mineral volume wise compared to the needs, so that's perhaps why we have a slight delayed response here. Let's take a look at Mexalon then. Ooh, that's also actually not so bad. Went up to above 100 ISK by quite a little bit, so I would say that the peak in Mexalon in Amarr was higher than in JITA, and now the decline, we are going to 92, almost 93 ISK for the sellers, 82.4 for the buyers, very much in line with the JITA prices. Here my thinking is this is the nullsec bottleneck, and if they can arrange a jump freighter to JITA or from JITA, they can also arrange a jump freighter to and from Amarr, and thus both of these might actually stay pretty well locked, because who is buying up all of that Mexalon? Who is creating this demand, this high price? It is the nullsec blocks. There we know that the first mineral they basically run out of locally when their industry goes full bore, like in a war. It is Mexalon, and well, if you can organize a purchase program from JITA, you can probably also organize one from Amarr, and so they can just keep buying up to the same prices. Makes sense to me. Volume increase though, very, very noticeable here since mid-August as well. We're definitely trading a lot more Mexalon every single day here. Then our Isogen chart has actually been a lot stronger in the last couple of months compared to JITA. JITA we actually lost, I think, from that 25 range, so this is higher in price than JITA. Very interesting. And now at the tail end we are dropping off. We're talking still almost 25 ISK for the sellers and 23 ISK for the buyers. Very, very narrow margin. Pretty aggressive buying happening right here. Average price going down a little bit, but this feels like actually a stronger performance than in JITA 4.4, because you could have sold your Isogen most of the time at 25 ISK. Compare that to titanium, that is a lot lower in price than Isogen. Makes for a completely different picture. Not a big impact on the volumes visible here. And then we have Noxium that, just like in JITA, is climbing to another one-year high point. I think it's a little still lagging behind though on the JITA increase. So we started the year at 250 ISK. That is definitely below the low point in JITA, so cheaper. So this bounced to 400. I think in JITA was up to 500. Basically lagging behind by 100 ISK in Noxium right here in the Amarr market, selling for 618 to 620 most of the time, and then 562 for the buyers. But we're very quickly heading toward that 700 ISK here on a little bit more demand potentially. But yeah, JITA is already up here. So once again, another chart that, just like titanium, is basically structurally lower than in JITA, at least for the last year, and where you could potentially say that, yeah, you could have for most of these months bought cheaper Noxium right here in Amarr than in JITA. Volumes, can't really tell a story from that just yet. What's happening with Zydrine? Also, yeah, decently strong performance. I would say slightly stronger than JITA, substantially above 1100 ISK for most of the last couple of months, and also a little bit more up and down on the daily averages. So let's take a look at where the sellers are at. 1200 ISK, that's higher than in JITA. 1024, that's pretty much the same as in JITA. And so here we do have this story of these daily averages, where on one day it's obviously that some people are just buying straight from these sellers. Then you get that 1200 and up average price. And then on other days you get some impatient people dumping their Zydrine to these buyers, and then we go down to 1000 discs. But the averages for Zydrine higher than in the JITA region, and again I am seeing an increase. I'm not sure if it's going to be sustained, but a daily increase in the volumes for Zydrine as well. And then Megasite is stuck at 500 disc in JITA, doing the same thing right here in Amarr. I think you get some more high-sec sources. Sell order volume wise, let's take a quick look if Ashap is playing. Not really. And so volume-wise, this is definitely a lot lower in availability than in JITA. 557 for the sellers, 485 for the buyers. A little bit more expensive, I would say, sellers in JITA, and the buyers a little bit more aggressive on this one. I'm again seeing mostly an increase in volumes here as well. Not sure if it will be maintained, but we also definitely have a difference between the locally easily mined minerals like titanium, like isogen, and like pyrite, where prices are at or below JITA prices, compared to stuff that's a lot harder to get like Zydrine and Megasite. That's probably a little bit more expensive on the seller side. Interesting to see if that will ever evolve. And then we have the Morphite market that also had that very strong not summer, but spring here. Look at that in April, May. That was 20,000 disc here in JITA. Also more expensive than here in Amarr 20k, also more expensive than in JITA, and is now going down below 12,500. 12,500 to almost 13k for sellers over here, 11,440. Whatever needs to be imported seems to be more expensive, or seems to have been more expensive in Amarr. But notice here again a substantial increase in daily trade volumes happening in Morphite as well. So there, to me, in my opinion, is a chance that that we are seeing more industry actually move towards Amarr because of these potentially cheaper prices in at least some of the minerals. And if that activity can attract imports as well, I don't know what's going to happen with JITA. It could actually go down a little bit. These monthly economic reports will become very interesting for that perspective. And this is also tied to the Tech 2 economy, which I think, I even got an in-game mail about that they're seeing more industrial activity around Tech 2 in and around Amarr. Let's see if we can confirm that or not by moving to the advanced pool materials, and we'll do that at 1740. Like that. And so this is a slightly more difficult category. Now let's start just like with JITA with 1.1 crystalline carbonite tied to the Galente production for Tech 2 ships, mostly modules I think as well. And this one is above 150, not a lot of supply, 150 for the sellers, 126 for the buyers, not a lot of buyers here either, specifically compared to JITA. Keep in mind though, Niarja has basically made Amarr a place that's further away from Galente space, I think. And despite that, I am seeing more consistent and higher volumes again in the last week. I think the real difference is going to be in Caldari and Amarr related items. So let's jump to 1.2 photonic metamaterials. No, actually to carbides, to 2.1. There we go. There we go. Titanium carbide, which is tied to Caldari ship production. And here we do see a lower price, big volume spike, so more supplies coming in. 180 for one seller, 190 for most. Definitely, potentially a very big price increase. 167 volumes, yeah, again noticeably up, despite the fact that this is for Caldari ship production, and lower prices as a result. In my opinion, it is showing increased activity. I'm surprised by that because the Caldari titanium carbides in JITA are actually very expensive, and so there I'm seeing, yeah, more interest, more demand for like local stuff, easier stuff that's easier to get there. But here we actually actually see lower prices for titanium carbide despite more volumes. So potentially again there are sources out there that now move to Amarr rather than to JITA, and this could become another industrial opportunity. Next up we have 3.1, which is ferrite carbide for Minmatar ships. Also definitely a decline, and you can see here more sustained volumes on average since the fall of Niarja, and prices have actually gone down below 150 ISK. Yeah, 143, another 14 million units coming in at 144 and 132. So I am a little bit surprised by this, but so far we have declining prices for the carbide materials and lower volumes. So that definitely feels a little bit off to my first expectation. Then we have tungsten carbide for Amarr, where, well, we actually have a little bit of interest apparently as well. A big volume spike that took the price up to 225. I think that's more expensive by quite a bit than in JITA. 209 ISK now for the sellers, not that much availability, and 180 for the buyers. And volumes wise, well, I would still say, especially in the last week, that we do have an increased daily volume as well. Let's take a look at the impact on metamaterials. Then 2.1 is 1.2 is what I'm looking for. Photonic metamaterials for Galente, far more stable. Although a slight downtrend. And again, look here at these daily average volumes. To me, it does feel like they are up. 17,850, reasonable price, I think. 15,000, also quite doable and reasonably competitive, I would say, with JITA. Then we've got 2.2 non-linear metamaterials for Caldari. This is very interesting and somewhat unexpected to me. Down in price, I think in JITA it's far more expensive. And here we have now 23,000 for the sellers, 20,600 for the buyers. It's still expensive, it's still a premium, but obviously also volumes have increased and they have decreased the price. So that looks to me like more supply in non-linear metamaterials. After that we have plasmonic metamaterials, which had the war spike just like in JITA, went up to like 55,000 ISK apparently in price. And then we also have a little bit of an overshoot, but also more volumes in the last couple of days. And we're actually, for the first time, I would say in the entire year, breaking 20,000 ISK on the lower end. Yeah, less than 20,000 for the sellers and next to no buyers. So if I would really say that perhaps a buyer of like 15,000 ISK, 14,000 ISK can easily snag some of these plasmonic metamaterials, and that becomes rather competitive with JITA as well. And if we're seeing a sustained increase in supply, which is all of this stuff, then perhaps buyers and thus industrialists will start to move here as well. Very interesting. And finally, we have our 4.2, which is terahertz metamaterials for Amarr ships. Here also we're seeing the increased volumes, but we're also seeing an increased price already. 26,000, that's actually expensive compared to JITA, and 17,000. Look at that wide margin between sellers and buyers here. Very, very interesting to me personally to see the increased volumes here across the board, and something that I did not expect, but it looks like the production of Caldari ships and Minmatar ships has actually gone down in price substantially locally because of more supplies, which, well, does create an opportunity just like with some of the minerals. It's not uniform. Amarr stuff is, to my surprise, more expensive, but there is definitely opportunities here. I'll take a quick look at some of the others, see if we can, for instance, yeah, very noticeable in my opinion right here, the increased volume on fermionic condensates, also putting a little pressure on the price. Ferrogel, same thing, although it's already declining, so who knows how, if these volumes will be sustained. Another note on that though, it's declining because the price is also reaching a one-year low point. 42,000 for the sellers, 36,000 for the buyers. That's basically in line with JITA. From being more expensive and harder to get than JITA, it has actually become more supplied and more in line with that price. Here we have fullerites, not as noticeable a volume increase, but also a chart which I know is very close to the JITA chart. 1000 disk, a bit above that for most of the year, and now actually a decline where we break through 1000 disk. This is the exact same price range as what we see in JITA. Hypersynaptic fibers, pretty noticeable increase in volumes, putting some pressure on the price. Nano transistors, actually more expensive still than in JITA, going at the moment for 6,300 disk. JITA is actually at around 5,000 disk and less than 5k for the buyers. But again, the volumes here do seem to be trending higher, which will put more pressure on the price, and which should then become more attractive for more buyers and thus more activity. Again, very clear volume increases here in phenolic composites, and finally ceramic fibers actually going up in price to 500 disk. Also clearly not super competitive. I don't expect to see a lot of orders here. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. This is still a market that doesn't really historically have a lot of it going on in JITA. You can see that on volumes, days with 0. That's something you never see in JITA, but we also haven't seen that in the last couple of weeks either. So very, very interesting story in advanced move materials. Not exactly the section that I would have thought this would happen, but it looks like Tech 2 production may be increasing in competitivity right here in the Amarr region. Let's also take a quick look at the Tech 2 ships. That's coming in at 25.55. 25.55. The main reason is I keep a close eye on these on JITA myself. I've actually tried a couple of trades in this stuff, and so I think that I am decently well placed to say, are we in similar ranges? Let's start here with the basilisk, for instance. What's very noticeable, look at the volumes here. Again, a substantial increase in volumes. Price-wise, right now, 247 million for the sellers, 181 for the buyers. That is a much wider margin and a far more expensive price for the basilisk. We did just increase in price from 200 million. That looks like more buying activity. Let's hope that these advanced move mats can actually quell that a little bit, keep prices in check, but overall definitely higher volumes. Cerberus is declining just like in JITA, but again more expensive still. 250 million for the sellers, 190 for the buyers is definitely more expensive. Also looks like it's a little bit less volatile, right? You only have 2 spikes here in the Cerberus where you could say, all right, this was something worth trading, and you don't see a price below 200 million for the average prices that often. So very pronounced buy opportunities. I mean, I've bought a Cerberus for like 185 and sold it for 240, things like that in JITA very easily. But also I am seeing, although this has apparently since the last 6 months or so, we're seeing increased activity in the Cerberus. Let's take a look at the Guardian, struggling in JITA by quite a bit. I think you can buy them for like 185. Well, here, look at that spread. 210 million for the sellers. Quick look if a shop is playing. Not really. No, not that much. 210 for one seller, 212. Definitely more expensive, but the buyers at 166 are also quite a bit more shy and even cheaper. So you could just buy this if you can and sell one of these, and you already have a very decent trade going on. Volumes up a little bit, but there's been periods where we've seen that before. Then what I'm personally interested in, stealth bombers. Here is the Hound chart. High points 50 million, 40 million. Man, that potential. Spikes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pretty pronounced spikes. Bottom ranges 20 million. Talk about a higher spread. This is actually pretty interesting. And now we are declining just like in JITA. But in JITA, let's take a quick look at my buy orders that I've actually triggered. I can show that to you guys as well. Order history. So I bought 4. Where are they? The item 4 hounds, 22.3 million a piece was the order from the list, and it's actually the cost 22.5. And then here in the the purifiers have done the same, even lower in price. So we have to compare 22.3, 22.5 to what's happening here in JITA. Yeah, 25 million, definitely a bit more aggressive. 31 million, more expensive as well than in JITA 4.4. Volume-wise, slight increase, but nothing too noticeable for me personally. Ikitursa, quite a bit more volatility, going for 450. Availability is really next to nothing. So it's this one clearly shows how much smaller the Amarr market is compared to JITA. But again, I am seeing increased volumes. Ishtar could be interesting. Right now it's hovering just around the 230 range. Look at the volumes here again. That is substantially higher. Availability really down the drain at a high price right now. 260 million almost for the sellers, less than 200 million for the buyer. Such a large spread. That's crazy compared to JITA. This does have opportunities, especially if the volumes hold up. That could increase volatility even more, in my opinion. Manticore is slowly drifting below 30 million. No buyers. 10 million, 18 million India Shap Trading Tower, and apparently he hasn't even set the range of that to 1, which is kind of weird. And then less than 30 million for the sellers, in line with JITA. The Munin is cratering to a 1-year low point. Not that much to notice here. Nemesis could be interesting. Actually less competitive, I would say. You've got one spike up to 35 million, but not that much. Right now, 22 million for the sellers, almost 28 for the buyers. That's a pretty narrow spread, actually. That is definitely also feels different. Here is the Oneros, just like in JITA. Volumes are terrible, less than 5 a day. Right now, going for a 1-year low point because there's absolutely no buyers of this ship here. Quick look at costs. Then Panther, 1.1 billion. This is, to me, slightly interesting. Obviously, the volumes are terrible, but right now, 1.17 billion. It's a touch above JITA, but not that much. Buyers below $1 billion is definitely less than in JITA, but the chances of you actually getting one of those buy order fills seems pretty low. And then the purifier, that could be more interesting. 35 million, quite a bit more often. Highest peak up to 45 million. Bottom is only at 25 million though. So this is going for over 30 million. Buyers are coming in at almost 25 million for the first one, and then 23 million for the next one. And yeah, I bought purifiers at 22 million with taxes included, so well below that on the actual price itself. So I'm gonna move these to the holdings because they actually triggered. But this is slightly interesting, especially because we're also, at least in some of what I'm gonna guess the market decides are more popular ships, we are seeing higher volumes as well. Scimitar also going back below 200 million, but yeah, all of these logistics cruisers are actually down in price in JITA as well. Widow going for around 1.1 billion. Very similar production cost, you could say, as JITA, but the volumes, they just aren't there. And then the Zealot actually showing that increased volumes and then the decrease in price, actually reaching a 1-year low point here. 200 million for the sellers, 162 million for the buyers, and actually holding one if I'm not mistaken, which I bought for 187 million, which is like a bargain in JITA 4.4. So very strange to me. It's a mixed picture for the Tech 2 ship market. I'm seeing higher volumes, but definitely not across the board, and we're seeing a much larger spread basically between buyers and sellers. A lot less demand, so potentially you can grab them at cheaper prices, but the lower volumes do make that harder to actually achieve. Potentially though, you can definitely trade in some of these ships. I mean, I personally think that the Ishtar here becomes quite tradable, especially because you have these higher volumes and you still have that massive spread between sellers and buyers. Compare that to JITA, we're talking 225 or something like that for the sellers, and then maybe 219 or 210 or something like that for the buyers. A much more narrow spread. I don't think that there's any real trades outside of maybe indeed one spike that you could have made in the Ishtar over the last 6 months or so. And here there's constantly more opportunities, specifically if these volumes do keep going up or maintain that increased volume presence. So that puts us at half an hour, around half a regular ETH talk. I'd say that that's a pretty good test as well. I'll keep an eye on the performance, but overall I would say this is very interesting to see what's happening in Amarr. And my first impression, now keep in mind this is only like a couple of weeks worth of data, is that we are seeing higher volumes, higher trade volumes, and mostly higher supply in Amarr of more bulky resource goods like minerals, like the advanced moon materials. And potentially a lot of these are either becoming competitive with JITA prices or even lower than JITA prices. Specifically, titanium is a lot cheaper here and has been so for a couple of months. Compare that to JITA prices, which could create that opportunity for better prices for industrialists and thus more activity just around here in general. We'll see if that holds up though. We of course don't know for sure that people will keep having the patience of sometimes basically running out of goods, running out of materials, running out of customers as well, compared to JITA 4.4. But right now on the resource base, the very first thing that is massively impacted by Niarja, because who from the systems around here is going to move minerals, advanced moomats, PI stuff? Who is going to move that to JITA now? Next to no one. And a lot of it is going to find its place in Amarr itself. And yeah, then we'll have to see if from there we can attract more industrialists around here, lower prices for other goods as well, and how that will then impact potentially JITA 4.4 as well, where minerals, for instance, are a lot more expensive than here in Amarr. Very cool stuff, and definitely something that I'll keep an eye on as well. Let me know in the comments if the quality of this video is okay. That was mainly the goal here as well, to see if this way of making ETH talk will be workable for the upcoming weeks. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and as always, I'll see you next time.